Hello and welcome to another daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk quite a bit about keepers and the truth behind the whole keeper situation, give a little bit of background on this and my current understanding of it, as there's been an enormous amount of rumor and talk over the keepers, not all of it really being true, but what is actually going on the front of goalkeeper. We'll talk about the sales as I've been talking for the last couple of weeks, but there's actually been some big potential news here and some things I do think are quite active on that front as well and will be fundamental to where we go moving forward from here. And then, of course, in addition to that, just quickly talk about the situation as it stands on the search for a striker. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Onana for a second. Um, I've kind of explained this before, but my understanding of the situation around the keepers and around Onana in particular is that if they could, if a good offer came in for Onana, and if he could leave pretty simply and they could recoup their money, not take a big loss, and be able to then go and spend and buy a new keeper, that they would be very interested in doing so. But there are two problems. Number one is the simple financials of a deal for Onana and how it would work. They would need, in essence, around 30 to 35 million in order to cover the fee that is remaining on him, not take a loss, and have space to buy another player. The other problem is the lack of potentially serious upgrades at keeper in order to spend that money on, in terms of who's ready, who's now. Now, the argument might be made, of course, well, anybody's better than Onana right now. That fair enough. I don't totally disagree. There's been way too many mistakes, no confidence from my side in it, and clearly this is an area that needs addressing. But when I say that they're not necessarily viewed as there are clear upgrades, the point is, if you're going to get a keeper and you want them to be an improvement, the cost to what you're getting is not viewed as that insane, where you can go get like a bona fide top keeper, spend a good chunk of money on them, and they're ready to go. They're flying in, they're great. They're instantly an upgrade. If you're gonna upgrade on him, the view is that the best use of money is more likely to buy someone who is younger, and potentially you'd want to rotate them, have them be competition, and have them work their way into the team fully, and give them the space where you can take them out of the line of fire at times, because young keepers all make mistakes too. So it's not exactly a completely clear-cut situation, but this much is true. They've been looking at keepers all year. Since the end of last summer, they had approached keepers. They were talking about buying keepers. They had actually made some offers or discussions with keepers to come in and be the competition, that they could earn the number one spot from Onana and take it if they performed well. There weren't too many takers on that exact thing at the time. One of the players that they did speak to was James Trafford. Again, ex-City Academy and all that. So, maybe that was part of the reason they went for him first, knowing who he was. So there was that one. And they've been looking for essentially competition for the whole year. Not necessarily just a straight upgrade, right in the first team keeper, but somebody to compete, because they think the best value for money is there. A young keeper who could come in and produce. So there's been a lot of, talk about this. This has been a serious focus, but obviously there's a ton of debate about Onana himself. And on the front with him is that, look, yes, they want to have somebody that they could replace Onana with. No, they're not satisfied with how it's gone. No, they're not happy with it. No, they're not confident. But that doesn't mean that they even can force him out, because one, he wants to stay at United, and two, it would be difficult to sell him. So, given that, the best use of funds most likely is to go for kind of a younger keeper. And that's what we've been looking at. And so, Onana situation as of right now is he's very likely just to stay. He's likely to stay at United. He's likely to be here next year. Um, like there's been stories about Monaco being interested in him, but they haven't made any offer. They haven't put anything forward. They would have to propose a fairly significant fee for it to work. And then United would have to feel like they can get a replacement or two replacements potentially into the team. And so that's why they're keeping tabs. Remember that, one of the things I really want to share about how they are operating that is different than before is just because they're checking on things doesn't mean we're buying those players. So in the past, we would often see, okay, it's time to go for a striker, or it's time to go for the next signing. So then we would start contacts and we'd hear, oh, United have made contact with the representative blank. And then it was, United have open talks with blank. Then it was United have agreed personal terms with blank. And then it was United have open talks with the club. And it was like sequential. And it was like when it was in summer, if you got good sources saying we made a contact with an agent, that's the guy we're going for. That's not how it is now. So they're prepared for all sorts of different scenarios and circumstances. And they're also prepared for things that may not happen and things that may happen in the future, and they still have multiple options rather than being totally fixated on singular targets like we might have been in the past, and then we chase, overpay like insanity, and that's it. They have many targets to look at. So on the keeper front, there's two things happening in terms of who they're talking to, who they're reaching, who they're contacting, all of that. Number one is that they're contacting people who are, one moment, sorry about the dogs. They're contacting young keepers who potentially, could come in and compete. So we've heard a few names on that front. Like I said, there was James Trafford before, but that one seems a bit unlikely now. He was close to going to Newcastle. However, with Burnley going up and the season that he's had, they've essentially gone down in their potential maybe to pay for him. The price has gone up, and it seems like less likely that they're going to buy him. They're asking for more like 35, 40 million, where the price before was 20, 25. So, Newcastle kind of going away from him. We probably aren't going to want to pay it that amount. It seems like maybe staying at Burnley is the best bet. Lamens is one that we've talked about before as being a good young keeper that has high potential, that we have solid links to, that I know we've watched, that I know we've looked at, and has been well established in English media as a potential target too. And then there's like maybe a more experienced one who's not old that could come in and just do a job in the worst case kind of scenario, and that would be like your Vanya Milinkovic-Savic, where you'd say, cool, he could come in, do a job, compete for first position, and you could potentially then still sign another younger keeper at a future period in time to come in and rotate with him once Onana is gone. So there's that plan. Then there's, well, what if Onana leaves? Well, we still probably want one of those young keepers, mind you. We probably do. But they will also want an experienced keeper. I think that one of the things that they feel disappointed about is that they can't rotate the keeper, that they don't have the dynamic where they can swap them. I mean, you look at successful clubs, including City and Arsenal, and including Liverpool this season, especially with Kelleher, like they had backup keepers they could rely on. If you look at our run in the Europa League under Jose Mourinho, we had Romero to play in different games and things. And yeah, I think if we'd had a different keeper, then they probably would have played in the Europa League or in one of these cups, and maybe the outcome would have been different. So they really do want to have a two-punch keeper thing where one could be the main one and they can have that kind of somebody they can count on to rotate. They're okay with that being Onana if they have another young keeper. Amarim's okay with keeping Onana if we can get another young keeper in and somebody else who could help. But if Onana were to leave, let's say a big offer does come in and they say, okay, there you go. We can move Onana on. Let's go. What would they want? Ideally, they're going to want a keeper who's more experienced, who's not a huge fee, and ideally it saves them money. So if they can save the 10 million a year that Onana costs in amortization, buy someone for half of that, so be it. Enter essentially the idea of Emi Martinez. Okay. Emi Martinez, as I shared before, though, is very much being overwhelmingly pushed by the agent. It is not a hot topic. It is not a concrete thing. It is not even close to happening, nor is it even potentially happening. At most, there was contact between United and the agent, and he'd be interested in the move. And it would be like, if Onana is sold, if he is to depart, then, Emi Martinez could come into the frame as someone that they could look at to say, here's an experienced keeper, 25, 30 million, get him in. Also get a young keeper, still ideally the plan there. So this is part of the long-term view, experienced keeper, young keeper. And again, as I've shared, it's not always about this summer, it's about the overall plan. And there's going to be things they're checking out this summer as to the overall plan that they may not get to this summer. That may be next summer projects if they just can't do it, if there's not the right options, if there's not the right bids, if there's not the right things on the table to make it happen. So, that's essentially there. Vanya could potentially fall into that older bracket too, where they moved Onana, they get Vanya and a young keeper, for example. I don't know of many others that could potentially come in terms of names, but because some of them have narrowed down, Joan Garcia went elsewhere. Chevalier and Maignan are two more that I do understand United have followed or made checks on. Mike Maignan wants Champions League and apparently is not an option for us in that regard. So we can kind of wipe that one out. Chevalier, someone they watched for a long time. We've seen Aston Villa linked to him. That's a young keeper. That's a keeper, maybe not necessarily like a young keeper anymore. He's fairly well established, but one where, yeah, maybe if they had the money from Onana, they'd make a move for someone like him, but they would have to sell. And right now it seems kind of unlikely. And there's still PSG and others in the race for him. So there's a few kind of names floating around, and it is a very, how would I say, fluid situation. But the facts are, one, they do want a new keeper, at least one. They do. Two, they're not forcing Onana out and he wants to stay. And three, there's nothing advanced even in the slightest for Emi Martinez at this point in time. That's what I shared, and then it was confirmed the other day as well by some others that that is the case. That there's been really no solid approach more than anything basic, and it would really only be the case if Onana were to leave. Now, there was a new meeting last week with Onana and his people in United that has sort of solidified him staying. They still want to get a keeper per the same reports, people who reported on that. But yeah, really, really, I would be about 80-20 towards more like, I'm like 60% we get a new keeper, 30% we don't get anybody all, and 10% Onana leaves and we replace Onana himself this summer. Okay. Next summer, I think it'll become more of a topic, but we'll see how he performs. You never know. He has a great season, then that all changes. Keepers are funny because it's like with players after a few seasons, with keepers, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they shit the bed and have a rough time and then it just turns around. They're like kickers in the NFL. It's like just occasionally it's just weird and then something changes and it all goes well. So we'll see there, but it's an active but very fluid situation to understand the truth of. But we are considering and still looking for a young keeper and would be willing to shift by India out as well. I want to talk about Antony. I've been sharing for the last couple of weeks about the advancements between Betis, Antony, and United, and that this was coming forward, that more talks were occurring, that more discussions were having, that he's open to that move, and that this seems like something that is advancing. There was news yesterday confirming a few things. Number one, Antony willing to take a pay cut to join Real Betis. I think that's very admirable, and I applaud that entirely. I think that is something obviously we're seeing that not everybody is willing to do, And it makes a huge difference as towards actually getting a player on the move. And when you take a player, it shows the ambition. They want to play football. That's what they're prioritizing. Him wanting to play football, him wanting to prioritize Betis, him willing to take a pay cut. He wants to go play somewhere. He will do well as a footballer. I can't fault that even a little bit. I can only say good for him. And I applaud you because at the end of the day, um, not a lot of people do that. And I think it is admirable. I think it is. I think it's a good thing. It's a World Cup year, right? A lot of players are playing for their place in the World Cup teams at their national level. Antony is one who's been kind of in and out of that Brazilian team. I think he's in it now. I'm not actually sure. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. But he will want to earn his place in there. And if he keeps playing like he did in at Betis last season, then I'm sure he will be in that Brazilian team. So there's a big push from his side that helps this deal. He's a lot of encouragement to United and Betis for that to happen. But in addition to that, what I think is really is great is that there have been direct club to club talks, and it was Fabrizio who confirmed, by the way, that Antony even turned down a move to Como because he wants Betis, and that's kind of advancing. Um, our friend Sully also confirmed this as well today, this morning, that things are advancing in terms of Antony and Betis. And I can say, as I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, this is moving. There's been real discussions between all the parties involved. The real proposals starting to be put together. Still needs work. I don't think it's going to be overnight, but I do think within the next 7 to 14 days, 1 to 2 weeks, this will start to move significantly. And I think there's a really good chance it gets done and that Antony does move to Betis. Some kind of structured deal is likely. I don't think it's that big of a deal in that respect. United, for what they paid for him, they have 32 million remaining amortization wise. I know I always bring up the money and it's boring and we shouldn't have to be accountants, but it's about what it does for us in a window. And Antony and Sancho, the next topic, are so big for this, even potentially bigger than the other sales. Antony costs us, quite literally costs us about, I would say 6-7% of our football budget is Antony in terms of amortization and wages. Getting a player like that off, getting him to move, and if we can get a fee that covers the amortization for this year, and then next year maybe it's a 15 million plus 15, where we get 15 now, 15 next summer when he's played 35 games or something like that. You know what I mean? Then it covers that amortization. It frees up the ability to go and get a player with that money. It really will unlock, the financials and keep us level. I spent a while discussing this yesterday on the live about where we're at financially and the position that we are in. But if we can move some of these big guys like Antony off, then we could spend a few things this summer. But also it means that we're doing so while keeping the overall expenses down, so that when we get into Europe, we can compete with the biggest clubs. And if we want to get back to competing in the market with Liverpool and City and all of them, the first step is getting back into Europe and shedding all of these poison pill purchases and contracts. And the biggest ones are Antony, Sancho, Casemiro to a degree, at least part of it. And then probably, unfortunately, Mason Mount. But Sancho and Casemiro will be gone next season. So regardless, so Antony is a big one on that. And Mount is going to be a hell of a lot more difficult. But this is moving. There are club-to-club talks. They've had discussions. They're talking about different proposals, and all parties are really interested in finding a deal here. It has to work for us. That's the important thing. We're not being greedy about the fee. This isn't even a situation where we're like, hey, we need tons of money. We need a big fee. No, it's not like that. We just want enough to make sure that, we're going to be able to cover the costs, not take a loss, and see some return on this thing, and that it will help us financially. And I think that that's totally fair to ask for, and I think that we'll work it out with Betis. Now, if they can complete their sale of a player to Atletico, get some money in, then that'll probably be the thing that triggers this to happen or unlocks the finances for this to occur. But this one's moving, and it is big news. As we get to the striker thing, I'll explain. Like it is that important. On the Sancho front as well, we got really good news yesterday, and I do mean really good, like quite solid news on this. That is really important. Um, for the first time, we heard yesterday that Jadon Sancho has an agreement of a sorts with Napoli. He's giving them a priority to join them. As I said before, he was very much open to going to Italy, and it seems like right now it is the preferred destination for Sancho is to go to Italy. The tax rate is a little more favorable there. They don't have that huge break like people think that did expire, but the tax rate is a bit more favorable. We've seen people, um, we've seen people in from England, from United especially, go to Napoli, to Inter, and have a great career over there. I think the pace of the league, the situation of it suits him really well. Napoli are looking for a winger, but in addition, we found that Juventus had come in for him as well. And that is huge news too. And that there's actually a bit of a growing competition there. And both moves are fairly solid, and could actually result in something meaningful. So this one is progressing. There's been new contacts between between Juventus and Napoli. It says that Juventus and United specifically have spoken on Friday to talk about to discuss a deal for him and what could happen. Juventus are continuing to move forward on it. Napoli are continuing to move forward on it, and the player is open to and right now prioritizing Napoli because they were first. As I kind of shared earlier in the week, there was probably a 5 to 10 million gap on this with Napoli based on the initial kind of view of the situation, which is that for the fee they wanted to pay and the wages that would have to be paid off in the cut, we needed 5 to 10 million more to make this work. I don't think we really want 25 million pounds at the end of the day. I think we'd be able to take something like 15 to 20, give a bit of a payoff to Sancho, and then on his way, wipes it out. No loss taken by the club, only gains financially. So they need to come up a bit, but the competition from Juventus helps a lot with that. We're not asking for much. And with the success from Napoli of bringing Scott McTominay in at 30 million and becoming the player of the season and helping them win the Scudetto over there, like, let's say this could be a very good deal. I think really they should be quite willing to pay 20 to 25 million for him. But the competition is good. Juventus were in for Sancho. It has to be noted, Juventus were really in for Sancho before he went to Chelsea. They were strongly in for him, very interested, and so the history of that is there, and there really could be a move that lines up for Sancho over to Italy. And so this is exciting because this and Antony to me are the two big ones. I missed one on the poison pill names, which was Rasmus Højlund. Now Rasmus Højlund's on a much lower wages than these guys, so it's a little bit different there. But I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, Jadon Sancho moving, having competition, looking like there's solid chase for him out of Italy that could result in us getting the rest of his value off the books and his wages and just having that clean break now. That's a huge news, something that's going to be really big for us and will open up space in the window. And I was talking about the percentages. Jadon Sancho costs about 10% of United's football budget. So when you take Antony and Sancho, you're talking about together 15 to 16% of United's football budget being spent on those two players that are not even in the club. Forget like Mount, who's at least there, Højlund, who's at least there. These are two who are not even in the club at all and are not going to be, and this would make a big difference. You're talking about like that with that 16% of United's football budget, that's where you should be able to add 1 to 2 top players with that kind of money, and you can potentially. So that will open the door for other things. So big competition there. He is willing to join. He is interested in the moves. It seems like there's progress happening. I think he's probably recognizing that there isn't much by way of options for him otherwise, and that Italy is probably a good destination to rebuild, still be in Champions League, still have the profile, all of that kind of stuff, and be successful. So I believe there are a few more discussions set to occur on this, and I believe there are potentially talks occurring even today or tomorrow on this as well. So I do think this one's really moving as well, has a really good chance of happening right now. As good a chance as we've had on Sancho. Never say never, but it's not, but yeah, Antony and Sancho actually progressing towards something. And things are starting to fill up, and eventually that bucket will tip over. And what will it tip over into is the striker. I'm not going to rehash Mbumo. Been done to death. We know where it is. We're okay, right? Brentford trying to make a market. They can't get one. Everybody expects us to get this deal done at the end. Just give it a little bit of time. On the striker front, we need money. As I've kind of said, it's a little bit of a half game, right? In between the club of like, could they spend more money? Yes. But that doesn't mean it's the responsible thing to do. It doesn't mean it's the disciplined approach that they want to take. And it doesn't mean that they're going to. There is one other factor that I have always forgotten and that I wish I could forget on the budget. And that I think everybody forgets to a degree, even though we never should. The Glazers still control the budget. They don't control how the budget is spent on football, but they are the presiding majority shareholders of the club. They are the main guys on the board. From a legal and literal sense, the amount of money that we have to spend is likely predetermined by them in conjunction with Sir Jim and Ineos. So it could well be that we're getting our ducks in a row on the strikers, looking at what we can do. It could well be we can't offer more for Mbumo as of this point in time without further discussions and things like that happening. Ineos and them have an enormous degree of control here. But when it comes to the basic finance of the company, and they've obviously everything they've done, we all kind of forget. It's also the Glazers doing it. It's also with their approval. It's also with their blessing, because technically their legal remit is only up to a certain degree over the football area. So we don't exactly know what budget's been approved. We don't know if it's this much in this quarter, this much after July 1st. That could also be the case, where after July 1st, there'll be more money to spend, more things that can be done. I'm not making excuses. This is an unknown, and it's one that needs to be solved. I do understand there are more. I mean, this isn't news. This isn't news. Please, I'm begging, don't aggregate this as news, because it always gets taken the wrong way. And then this part right here, and people think I'm making some big claim when they just see it instead of watching the videos. Please don't aggregate it. There are board meetings very regularly, and there's one very, very, very soon coming up between, and I say at the high level board meetings, like with the Glazers and everything. Usually when that happens, there are significant decisions being made about how to go ahead with things. Because look, no matter what, you've got all of these options on the table. Let's say they've looked at everything. They're saying, this is what we got to do this summer. We've got this player is going to cost X. This player is going to cost X. This is what we want to do. They still need that final approval, even from just Ineos. They need that final approval from the board and all of that on expenditures and money and things like that. It may well be things start to shake loose a little bit after this meeting, and some more decisions are made as to the next phase of our summer recruitment beyond the Cunha and Mbumo thing, and everything starts snapping into action. It may be. Things tend to happen after these meetings, and they happen fairly regularly, but there are ones coming. So I think that's just something to note anyway. On the striker front, like I said, we've been doing lots of different check-ins, lots of different looks at different players, and and things kind of all over the place. Now we've really still only heard about Gyökeres and Ekitike as the two major options that are left on the table beyond like Mateta. But I think where we stand today is United kind of know what would the Gyökeres thing cost, what would the Ekitike deal cost, what is the likelihood of someone like Mateta? Are there other backup options like Gonzalo Ramos, who's been offered to us? And we've got all our options sitting on the table. And now they're going to wait a little bit. And they're probably going to, these are things that are going to be discussed in the coming days and weeks about what is the decision? What do we do here? When and if these Antony and Sancho deals come through, we will be able to move on that front from a striker standpoint. We will be able to if we can get one of these guys, if they're at the value that we want. So that's part of the decision that has to be made. Are any of these deals value for money, and do we think we can get it done? Are any of these deals ones where we think it's a good decision, and can we get it done? Because we will be able to, after Antony and Sancho, we will be able to, after Antony and Sancho, maybe even just one, to take another step forward, but both would certainly make it a sure thing. And so that's the main thing. And then with the consideration of what are the other things we want to do with the midfield, with that keeper, you know, where are we at with all of this? So there's some big decisions here to come. They're willing to wait it out. They want to see what happens with Arsenal and Gyökeres, I think, is their first priority. I do believe they feel there's a deal there that is good value, that is good value for the type of player that they view Gyökeres as, which is to rate him pretty highly. I do also believe that, you know, on Ekitike, while they like him, again, it would have to come way down, so they'll have to wait that out. And I do think they would consider something like, you know, a Gonzalo Ramos loan or something if they can't get necessarily everything that they need. So, you know, if they can't get one of their top targets. But that's where it's sitting. And the other factor in this is Rashford and Højlund and what happens there. Rashford is obviously kind of still close to Barcelona. Again, I think people mistook that Nico Williams thing. Doesn't mean that they're not going for Rashford. They still potentially are. There's interest from Inter. United would be willing to let him go on loan. I can say that. I believe that to be the case, that they would be willing to let him go on loan. Obviously, in an ideal sense, they want to sell him, and they'll hope for a sale, and they'll hope for something decent. And that's what they're going to plan for first. But there's been, you know, at the end of it, I think they would be willing to let him go on a loan if that's the only option that comes forward at that point. And for Rashford, while he would prefer Barcelona, he would be open to others. Højlund, there's still this interest and talk from Inter, but they're moving a bit slow at the moment. They're still working on Bonnie. They're still interested in Højlund, but it is a little bit slow. So it's complicated. We're still waiting on that, but in the meantime, Antony and Sancho are getting done. We're still checking out keepers. There's some meetings to come and some big decisions that will be made, and hopefully that will kick the next phase of summer recruitment forward, get Mbeumo over the line, and really in earnest work on the next couple of targets. So that's what I'm looking for in this next week, for Antony to get done, Sancho to get done, or at least move to much closer to being done to where we see it seriously. And then United really in earnest pushing get Mbeumo done and starting more fully on the next topic, which should be striker, to move ahead on what decision are they going to make. Because if it's something like Gyökeres, maybe a week from now, maybe end of June, if they decide they want to do that, they have to decide and say, okay, we're going to go to him now and say, now it's now or never. We're here, but we're not going to wait around forever. It's now or never. Arsenal clearly dicking around. You want to join or not, or we're moving on to other targets, and that's pretty much it. And we'll go and make an offer for somebody else. So we'll see once they have that kind of, if they go and have that kind of discussion. But those are the things I'm looking for in the next week or two, because once July hits and the players return July 6th, then it's going to be serious. We need Mbeumo for sure done by then, but everything needs to start really getting knocked down on these other deals, and at least one more player for the starting 11 brought in and ready to go on that US tour. We need that. Okay, that's what I have for today's video. let's keep an eye on it because there are, as I said, discussions occurring over Sancho potentially today, tomorrow. An interesting meeting potentially to come. More talks with Antony and all of that happening. And then we'll see what kicks on the next phase in the start of next week. All right. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you all. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.